Ecuador. How did we ever get to Ecuador? It's an interesting little journey that in my own writing that I've been doing in my story, it was interesting. I don't know why we ended up in Ecuador. The Lord took us there. My brother and his wife and family were already in Ecuador. And they had been in Cuba, got run out. And so when I was preparing for going to the mission field, I was going to go to Cuba with them. Somehow or other, I was sort of drawn to start our missionary career with them somewhere. So since they'd gone to Ecuador, we decided, well, let's just go to Ecuador. And it proved in the long run to be a sort of a testing point for us. It set our minds for the rest of our life. But at the beginning we went there because that's where the mission was that we were with, and that's where my brother was, so we went. And when we got there, we were new on the field, and so they didn't have anything really going for us at the moment, and so they said, well, the hospital needs somebody to do administration because the gentleman that was the administrator had taken off for his home assignment. And so we'd had the latest experience in an American hospital. We'd had our tonsils out up in Loveland. My brother was a doctor there. So we just decided that that would be a good place to get initiated into the culture, the language, because our language school had only been 6 months long, so we knew how to say buenos dias, but not much more. And all of a sudden to be placed in a place where you have 20 employees plus 2 medical doctors on the staff and 3 American or Canadian nurses, and all of the things that go with the hospital, from electrical generation all the way to the water system and the mechanics and the carpentry and all of that stuff, and doing it in Spanish with all of those people. And so there we got dumped right after we arrived, and spent our first year, a little bit more there at the hospital in Shell Mera, the Ip Memorial Hospital. It was a wooden building which now no longer exists because there were some other little creatures in the jungle that enjoyed chewing on that wood. So that was where we spent our first year, really, in Ecuador. Well, the hospital was situated in Shell Mera, and across the road was a big military installation with an airstrip. And it was the airstrip that Nate Saint used when he had gone in. That was the major MAF headquarters was there, Nate Saint's home and so forth. And so we supplied all the medications. I mean, if they needed some, whatever it was, they'd call in, and Corinne became the pharmacist. She had a lot of experience in that, of course, but not the pharmacist as you would know them here, but she was the one that would take the orders from the jungle for the medicines they need, put them in, get them down to MAF, and then MAF would fly them in. And so on one occasion, Dr. Fuller, Ev Fuller, was asked by Rachel Saint if he would come in and look over some of the Auca, the Waorani, because they were having some medical problems. And so he decided he would go, but he thought he may have to pay for the flight. So he said, you want to go along? And so I said, well, of course. I mean, who doesn't want to go and see history, and what had happened? And in addition to that, we were married on January 28th, the same month that they were killed on the 8th. So we had somewhat of a connection with that month and time, and we were quite aware of it. But when he asked if I'd go, I said sure. So I grabbed my new Pentax camera and loaded the film, and in we went. And it was quite a flying in over and just thinking and trying to think what change has happened in these 5 years. This was in November of '61, and they were killed in January of '56. And understanding and knowing that they had changed. But you still look down there and you see all these people running to the airplane, and you're sure glad they don't have spears in their hand. they came to welcome us with quite a welcome, because we came in a helio courier, because the strip is very short, and purposefully so that other larger plane couldn't get in. And they're sort of interesting how they just sort of settled down and hit the end of the strip, and they all came rushing to the airplane. But I could still see that in my mind as we approached and wondered what our time was. I just went along. I mean, I had no purpose for being there as far as I was concerned at that point. And it was just an invitation that I wouldn't resist. And so we got there. I mean, we were white. I mean, and they were down in the river, and they were playing in the water, all the old men. So we were asked to come on and get in the water. Well, we had to change clothes. And their walls are only about 1 meter high. So that doesn't give much privacy. And, of course, we like our privacy when we're changing clothes, because everybody's looking at you, you know. So first of all, I started making a noise, running down to the river. And so Doc got in Rachel's house and quickly changed into his swimming trunks. And when they saw him come out, he was, 6'4" or so. He was big, long white legs there. He came running down the hill, and so they all followed him, and I went and changed clothes. So we both got into our swimming suits, and we're in the water. Of course, they didn't need swimming suits, but we thought for our own self and our own modesty, we should probably at least cover up some. So, but it was just an interesting time to be able to watch them fishing in the river, be able to just participate with them. We couldn't understand a word they're saying, because they spoke the Waorani, and we spoke English and Spanish, but we got along. But that was our introduction to them, and they were really a jovial people that we enjoyed a lot just being with at the time. As we couldn't spend all night there, so we got out of the river. We had a dinner together. I forget the details. I mean, that's been 52 years ago. So the old mind just picks out the top things. But as we finished dinner and we were sitting in the evening, and they started sharing their testimony. I love to hear people just sharing their journey with Christ, and they began to share one at a time, and it was translated by Dayuma into Spanish, and then so we were listening to this in Spanish as they shared how they had come to know Christ, what they were like, and what Christ had done in their life, and then another one would start on, and they would start giving their testimony, and this went on one after another, and it was getting light into evening, and finally there were 9 of them. We found out that had said, okay, now we have expressed to you how we have come to Christ, and from what Dayuma tells us, our next step is to express that by being baptized. So would you baptize us in the morning? Well, Doc was a little bit taken back because he is a medical doctor but not an ordained minister, and during that epoch of church history and in the missionary endeavor, those kinds of things were done by ordained pastors. And so as they were fretting a bit about this, I realized the reason that the Lord had just serendipitously put me in that spot, because I said, my hands have been ordained, and so I am a pastor, I can do this. And so he was relieved, and we made arrangements then the next morning that we met in the river before we left and went back to Shell Mera. So we went out in the river. We talked them all to be clothed, although I did get into trouble with my aunt, who was my mother's sister, who was a quite staunch Lutheran. And when she saw the pictures, she was just, that I would do such an act of, one of the rites of the church, and I would do it with shorts on. I was supposed to have a long gown and the collar backwards and be all ecclesiastical, but I was just glad they had clothes on. And they were mostly clothed at that time when people are there. So we went in the river one by one, and it was Dayuma and Rachel and Doc really conducted the service. I just stood back in the water because there was no real connection that I'd had with them previously like these had. So after they had each one come, made their confession of faith, then Doc just took them, turned to me, and I was able to put them underwater. But I thought, a particular chemo, I mean, there were three. I have to look at the picture to see exactly the numbers. But as I put these young men in, they were strong. I mean, their shoulders are strong and their arms, if you look at them at that time. And I thought, they're trusting me. They don't know me from Adam, but they trusted me and grabbed my wrist and let me put them under the water. And I thought, I thought later, what would have happened if we'd have just held them there? But it didn't cross my mind at that point. But they did trust me to do that as a brother in Christ. And I still remember that. They're hanging onto my head and letting me do that. And so it was for all of us there, it was a very special moment. And I know that as the Lord looked down on that, it was another step in their faith journey as they were going on. And it was a momentous occasion for us. It was just a privilege. And it was, again, I had no reason to be there except in God's sovereign plan. Somehow or other, He slipped me in the plane and was there because of that need at that moment. And He's good. He's pretty wise in how He handles His people and the journeys of His people. Their history I know parts of, and of course it continues because from some of the later things that I've heard, their numbers have increased because they've quit killing each other, as it goes. But probably the estimates and those that have become believers out of the estimates between 1,000 and 2,000 Waorani that are there in the jungle now, probably 25% are good believers, have come to know the Lord. But it did have a major change in the whole environment of the tribe because the killings began to diminish. They, of course, did not continue, but with others even in that tribe in what they call the downriver Auca, some of their kissing cousins. So it has had a major impact on them. And of course, it was, again, providential in thinking that it was just prior also to when these oil companies were coming in, the influence of outside people, they were being assimilated into the larger culture now. And had that taken place when they were still quite in the, as we would say, savage state, I think it would have been much more difficult for them. But now coming and having advocates that can help them in their interaction with the culture from outside, pressing them for a variety of things, and even the other indigenous cultures endeavoring to work to get them to join in with them forces against things. To have a group, at least a major group, part of them that are really committed to the Lord has been very, very beneficial. But yeah, it has had an impact on them and upon their neighbors. They don't kill the Quicho when they cross the river anymore. So everybody is a little more satisfied with that. When at the conclusion of the baptism, however, Kimo, who was one of the major elders of the Christian community at the time, very strong young man. I think if you've seen the end of the spear, he was the one that was highlighted there as getting this thing going. But at the end, he prayed as we concluded the time of the baptism, and it was fascinating as he put his hands over his eyes and he was talking to his Heavenly Father, that they were really aware that as the Lord had given them this opportunity to know Him, if it was so important to God that, as He said, 6 men gave their lives so that we could know You, Your Son Jesus who You sent, who died for us, and the 5 that we killed who were bringing us this message. If it's that important, then our lives don't mean anything to us. We're willing to take the gospel to anyone regardless of what it costs. And in that environment and culture, that was not an idle prayer because they were used to having their lives taken quite a bit. And the story is later there was one, Tonya, who was actually martyred as they were endeavoring to make contact with the the other tribe, and in that he was martyred and said, "You're killing me because I've come, and I just said, this is okay. I've come to share my Jesus with you." And so there's a lot of history that's happened in this last 50 years. I mean, many things have gone on, but that moment is pretty well engraved in my mind, and I am amazed that God would take a crazy preacher's kid and throw him in the jungle for a moment like that, but he's good. Dr. Fuller is now with the Lord, and so he is, but we have had contact with him over the years, and also here in Colorado Springs since World Radio Missionary Fellowship, HCJB headquarters is here, and some others, many retired missionaries in the area. We do have every year an Ecuador old-timers reunion, and we get together with each other just to share those old experiences. David Osterhus, who was the pilot, during much of this time down there too, is the one who sort of organizes that. And but we still carry on as much as we can with those. And but the Waorani themselves, no, I have not had any additional contact, and they really didn't know me. I was just there by divine appointment, and it, in a way, in my own life, as I think and reflect on that, I'm sort of glad, because the issue is obedience, not necessarily renown. So whether or not they ever remember who it was makes no difference. It was that God had already planned that and done it. And I think of that when, from what I have been told early in the experience of Elizabeth Elliot. We called her Betty back then. Elizabeth Elliot. She was asked if it didn't make her really feel better that so much had happened, so many people had committed their life to the Lord, that so many of them had come to Christ, and that the results of this really made her feel that it was okay. And from what I understand, her response to this particular person was it would have made no difference at all. The issue was they were all obedient. What God does with it is His business. And I think this is true in our walk all the time. I mean, it's not the results. We are so result-oriented here that sometimes we fail to be obedient in the smaller things, that we don't see the results. And so I think the same thing for myself. I have not followed these individuals specifically. We've prayed for them for that context over the years, but I was there for a purpose. I completed the purpose. I was obedient in that point without even knowing why, and I'm just thankful for it. It's a part of my mind, my memory, my history that I really thank the Lord for. He's good.